Welcome back to Learn Astrology with Mary. My name's Mary English. You can find me at www.maryenglish.com, maryenglish.co.uk and UK Astrologer. Hello, how are you? We are having a ridiculous amount of rain yesterday, so today is very, very soggy underfoot. Blech. But we've had a nice day. Now, today I'm going to be talking about just one planet in just one house. And the reason I've chosen this today is because I've sort of lived it and breathed this particular thing. So what we're going to be talking about today is Saturn in the 12th house. And I'm going to first of all quote from Karen Hamaker-Zondag's book, The 12th House, The Hidden Power in the Horoscope. Can you believe somebody wrote a book just about one particular house? There's another lady that wrote about it. Her name's Tracy Marks. So it's a reasonably popular subject within astrology, the 12th house, the hidden house, the things that you don't see. But this is Saturn we're talking about now. So living, breathing it. I gave birth to a child, and soon after he was born, so something like a couple of years, and my ex-husband ran off with another woman, and so therefore my son didn't have his dad in the house growing up. Now, I didn't know much astrology then, as I've explained before. I only got into astrology when my homeopath was talking about something must have happened during my Saturn return. I didn't know what the hell a Saturn return was. So this is 30-something years ago, because I'm 65 now. And so I didn't realise until I read it in a book after I learned astrology. So after all of this had happened, his dad had gone off and blah, blah, blah. I thought, blimey, would it have made any difference had I known that when he was born? Would I have said, oh my goodness me, hubby, our baby's got a son in the 12th. That could mean that you might not be here when he grows up. Well, obviously I wouldn't have done that. But and in fact, I'm glad that I didn't know that, in a sense. So as you know, I know that this can be a thing when Saturn's in the 12th. The father might not be around as the child's growing up. Now we've got 3 charts. I'm not going to use my son's chart, obviously, because I do not have his permission. He's not even one iota interested in astrology as far as I'm aware. But we are going to use 3 charts today. We're going to use Angelina Jolie, Barack Obama and Russell Grant, who you might not have heard of, but if you live in the UK, you would have done. He's an astrologer. So let me read Karen Hamaker-Zondag's book. So I'm quoting from page 61. And because it's all about the 12th house, she talks about various different planets in the 12th. But now we're on to this, page 61, Saturn in the 12th. It's remarkable how often we find Saturn in the 12th or in aspect to the ruler of the 12th in the charts of children whose fathers were absent or hardly ever present in their early youth. The result is therefore very like that of the sun in the 12th, but there are in fact differences. Here are some examples. In some instances, one of the parents seems to have no initiative, perhaps through a lack of backbone, and relies very heavily on the other, or puts on a hard front to disguise the weakness and avoid facing up to it. The baby picks up the problem via the psychic umbilical cord. In other cases, both parents have a problem. One of them leans on the other and draws strength from him or her, while the other gains an identity as a helpmate. But this is only a cloak to cover a sense of inadequacy. In practice, the sex of the parent doesn't matter a jot. Both have to do with Saturn in the 12th house. The difference from the sun in the 12th is that Saturn is very much involved. The difference from the sun in the 12th is that the sun is much involved with identity problems, with the feeling of being oneself, whereas Saturn in the 12th, or an aspect to the ruler of the 12th, has more to do with an inner backbone, with the finding of a certain measure of stability in life and in the form or structure one gives one's life, and with the structure within which one is free to be oneself. Just as with the Sun in the 12th, with Saturn here, we encounter parents who had problems with their own parents, or at least were trying to come to terms with the parents, and this affects the child. This also occurs with the Moon in the 12th, but much less frequently. Also, a repressed feeling of loneliness, or a feeling of loneliness held at bay in one of the parents, or similarly repressed inferiority feelings, can go with Saturn in the 12th or an aspect to the ruler of the 12th. In conversations with parents of children with Saturn in the 12th, I've sometimes heard the mothers say they found their life situations completely unsatisfactory. These mothers were usually those nowadays called suburban widows, living in a quiet, unexciting part of town far away from where their husbands work. Every morning the men leave home before the crack of dawn and do not get back until late in the evening. The children are at school all day and the mothers do not feel settled in the environment where they live and work. Some of them reach for the sherry bottle before 11 o'clock in the morning for solace. I must say that expression, reaching for the sherry bottle, is rather dated, but then I think Karen's round about the same age as me, if only a tiddly bit older, but I don't think people even drink sherry anymore. Anyway, there we go. Sometimes Saturn the 12th, or aspect in the ruler of the 12th, expresses itself in inherited characteristics. One child had a crooked back and the parents had suffered with back problems from an early age. Another example is that of a child with deformed feet, a problem that went back in the family to one of the grandfathers. More often, I've not seen physical problems, although I've regularly heard of people with Saturn the 12th, or in aspect to the ruler of the 12th, who suffered from cold feet and or backaches. In fact, there seems to be some connection here. Again, with Saturn in connection to the 12th, we see a great number of problem situations, but there may be exceptions. I once talked with an astrologer who's had Saturn in the 12th, who belonged to a large family where all the children have Saturn in the 12th. What's the chances of that? She could think of no problems associated with the placement and was perfectly satisfied with her situation. Although it is wise to treat with care the evidence of the conscious mind concerning what are usually unconscious processes, I regard the case important enough to mention. There is a not altogether impossible chance that during the many years in which all the children were passing through their mythic phase, the parents were facing one persistent problem. Perhaps something was inherited from the parents that the parents didn't see as a problem because it was unconsciously integrated into their characters. Thus, although a rather difficult situation is often found, this is not a hard and fast rule. Now, I am going to quote from more than one book today because otherwise it's not balanced. So now I'm going to quote from The Only Way to Learn Astrology Volume 1 by Marion March and Joe McEvers, and they say, Saturn in the 12th house, keyword circumspect. Morbidly sensitive, you're inclined to isolate yourself or else to live with a constant wish to retreat. You enjoy solitude, your creativity flows when you work by yourself, but too much isolation will lead to loneliness and fear. Because you're tied down to respectability and accepted mores, you tend to keep your problems locked up within yourself. This can lead to a life as against me attitude. You must cultivate an optimistic outlook and a hope for the future. You should get away from self-centered attitudes and learn to serve humanity or those close to you. With difficult aspects, your father may have faded out of your life early. She gives a few examples here. Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, the writers Ralph Waldo Emerson, Eric Maria Remarque and Mark Twain all had Saturn in the 12th. And the next book I'm going to quote from is Astrology for Dummies by Ray Orion. And I've got both. Well, I've got 2 editions, but I think there's 3 editions. But this is the one of the first. I think it's the first, not first edition, but it's one of the first printings. Saturn in the 12th. Oh, in fact, she says here, Saturn in the houses. So Saturn's position by house determines those areas of life in which you need to create a sense of order and boundaries. But let's say the 12th house does have no order or boundaries, does it? So Saturn in the 12th, you're a helpful person. Many people would be astonished to know that beneath the surface you wrestle with fear, pessimism, insecurity, loneliness and guilt. Although you're used to working behind the scenes, solitude is an issue because your fears become more vivid in your mind when you're alone. Whether you tend to sink into it with a sigh of relief or pedal madly in the opposite direction, becoming comfortable with solitude is essential to your welfare. Now, lastly, I'm going to quote from Managing Your Health and Wellness, A Guide to Holistic Health by Diane Kramer. Love this book. It's great for medical astrology. So this is on a medical astrology perspective. Saturn in the 12th. You work well when alone and at times seem to thrive on isolation. Your immune system can be weak and needs to be built up. There can be weaknesses in the foot area, which is what was being spoken in an earlier quote, and conditions such as foot deformity, fallen arches, bunions, cold feet, and accidents causing injury to the feet. The reason is the 12th house is like the 12th sign. The 12th sign is Pisces and it rules the feet. You have a tendency towards worry and anxiety, which can lead to depression. There is a need to cultivate a positive attitude. So even if you haven't got an absent father, there can be a tendency to loneliness or wanting to be alone, depending on obviously what your upbringing's like, what your family situation's like, whether or not you have siblings, if you have a nice school, la 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 la. And in my case, it wasn't as if my son's father wasn't alive. He certainly was, but because he'd run off with another woman, he was living with her eventually. And so therefore, he wasn't in the, inverted commas, family home. So he wasn't there on the day-to-day going to school and what do you want for breakfast and da. So his dad wasn't around for that. So let's go on to the chart examples that we've got. So I'm going to start with Angelina Jolie. And her Wikipedia page, obviously, because Auntie Mary's going to quote from that, is quite interesting. And all we're focusing on today is Saturn in the 12th. And does that often show up as having something to do with dada? Okay, so here we have. Jolie has had a lifelong dysfunctional relationship with her father, which started when Voight left the family when she was less than a year old. She has said that from then on, their time together was sporadic and usually carried out in front of the press. They reconciled when they appeared together in Lara Croft Tomb Raider 2001, but their relationship again deteriorated. Jolie petitioned the court to legally remove her surname Voight in favour of her middle name, which she's long used as a stage name. The name change was granted in September the 12th, 2002. Voight then went public with their estrangement during an appearance on Access Hollywood, in which he claimed Jolie had serious mental problems. At that point, her mother and brother also broke off contact with him. Jolie and Voight did not speak for 6.5 years, eventually rebuilding their relationship in the wake of Bertrand's death from ovarian cancer on January 27, 2007, and they both went public with their reconciliation 3 years later. So in her early life and background, it says, following her parents' separation in 1976, she and her brother lived with their mother, who had abandoned her acting ambitions to focus on raising her children. And then lots of other sort of blurb about what or didn't happen. Now, in Angelina Jolie's chart, we've got, I was only searching for AA charts, and then to get my last chart example, which is Russell Grant, I needed to do an A because he's an astrologer. He's going to know if his chart's right or not. And Angelina Jolie has 28 degrees Cancer ascendant, 52 minutes. She's got Venus 28 degrees and 9 minutes in her 12th house, and her Saturn is 17 degrees. So not only has she got Saturn in the 12th, she's got Saturn square Moon, Saturn square Mars, and Saturn square Jupiter. So going back to the chart examples, but you know what I've been reading with the books, not only has she got Saturn in the 12th, but she's also got challenging aspects from one planet, from Saturn to a personal planet, which is the moon. Yeah. She's Sun Gemini, Mercury retrograde Gemini in the 11th. She's Jupiter, Moon, Mars in Aries in the 9th, and she's Neptune in Saggy in the 5th, and Uranus and Pluto, both retrograde in Libra in the 3rd. So her 12th house has got 2 planets in, the Venus and the Saturn, and Venus makes a square to Uranus. So she definitely has Saturn in the 12th, and it's in the sign of Cancer, which I think is detriment or something. Is that the right word? Or domiciled? Or yeah, I thought it was. When Saturn's in the sign of Cancer, it's detriment. So it's not entirely positive. It's a ruler to the moon, and it's exalted in Jupiter, which actually is where Jupiter at the moment is transiting through the sign of Cancer. Very nice. So poor old Angelina has got Saturn in Cancer. So in medieval astrology, that's detriment. It's not happy bunny there. And it's hidden in her 12th. And she definitely has a quite a difficult relationship with Dad. Not only was he not there because the parents split up. 93% of the time, if parents get divorced, quite a lot of times it's the mother that's expected to raise the children. It varies a bit now. There's, co-parenting and that type of thing. And I do have clients, and I do know people who are separated and their children were brought up by Dad. For various different reasons, so it's not always the mother. So let's go on to our second example. So this is Barack Obama. He's a sun sign Leo. He's got an Aquarius ascendant, 18 degrees. He's got Saturn at 25 degrees in the 12th, and he's also got Jupiter retrograde. I think it's Saturn's retrograde. Yes, Saturn's retrograde in Capricorn. Saturn's happy in the sign of Capricorn. But obviously when the planet's retrograde, it alters things slightly. And then his Jupiter is 0 degrees Aquarius, and that's retrograde also in the 12th, but we're just doing Saturn today. His Sun is in the 6th, along with Mercury in Leo. He's got Venus in Cancer in the 5th. He's got Moon in Gemini in the 4th. Pluto and Uranus in the 7th. Pluto's in Virgo and Uranus is in Leo. And then he's got Mars in Virgo in the 8th and Neptune in Scorpio in the 9th. And he's born the 4th of August 1961 in Honolulu, Hawaii. So again, I'm going to quote from Wikipedia about, what happened with him and his dad. So under early life, it says, now where are we now? Hold on, let me just get to the right bit. Okay, so Barack Obama's parents were married in Hawaii on February the 2nd, 1961, and they met in a Russian language class in Hawaii, and his father was a foreign student on a scholarship. So in late August 61, a few weeks after he was born, Barack and his mother moved to the University of Washington in Seattle, where they lived for a year. During that time, Barack's father completed his undergraduate degree in economics in Hawaii, graduating in June 62. So for that time, obviously Daddy, is in Hawaii, but Mummy is in Washington. So Daddy wasn't around. He left, so this is his father now, he left to attend graduate school on a scholarship at Harvard University, where he earned a Master of Arts in Economics. And then Obama's parents divorced in March 1964. So his dad wasn't around too much when he was born either, and I think he came to some awfully untimely end. I think he died in a car accident, if I remember rightly. But you'll find the link on Wikipedia. I'm sure it was a car accident. Yes, he died in a car accident. He was only 48. That's not old, is it? So there's a nice little quote from Barack on his Instagram account, dated the 14th of November 2020, where he says, "The fact that my own father was largely absent from my childhood helped shape my ideas about the kind of father I intended to be. When Malia was born, I made a promise to myself that my kids would know me, that they'd grow up feeling my love keenly and consistently, knowing that I'd always put them first. While serving as president, I made sure to have dinner with Michelle, Sasha and Malia every evening by 6:30. We'd eat some good meals and catch up on our days. That was one of the best parts of living above the store, as I sometimes called it. Seeing them grow up into intelligent, strong and compassionate young women they've become has been the greatest joy of my life. I'm reminded constantly that there's no place in the world I'd rather be than with Mish and our girls, and it's why I've dedicated my memoir to them. Ooh, bless. And he even wrote a book about his early childhood called Dreams from My Father. So here we have someone that's aware of his early childhood and how it might have affected him. And like he says, he doesn't want that same thing for his children. So it's nice to see that he has managed to reconcile himself to his childhood. Not everybody does that. But let me tell you, when people get into astrology, they do. So once you start learning about your own chart and things you've got in there, it makes it much, much easier to come to terms with things. Now, I'm going to now quote from astro.com, and it's called Astro Click Portrait. So we're now going to the more sort of positive ways of looking at Saturn in the 12th house. And the blurb here says, you often feel discouraged about yourself for no particular reason, even believing that you aren't as good as the people you know without any justification whatsoever. You may feel that others do not like you, and even when they praise you, you can't take it seriously. Also, you may have the sense that your personal world isn't very stable, that at any minute sweeping changes could occur that would upset everything. Along with feelings of inferiority, this makes it difficult for you to act decisively when you should. You spend a great deal of time trying to make sure that conditions are safe for you to act without being defeated in your efforts. The important lesson to learn is that most of your fears about yourself and your world are imaginary. As you get older, these problems will lessen and you become more secure and self-confident. So that interpretation is written by a guy called Robert Hand, and it's from some blurb called Youth Portrait. So I'll now read you Robert Petelia's interpretation. And he says about Saturn in the 12th, Saturn was in the 12th house at the time of birth. This planet may place many unpleasant and annoying obstacles in your life and intensify the feelings you have about the limitations of your environment. Your professional honour affects your feelings very much, and you're well satisfied when things go well. Destiny may have to teach you to tell the difference between fact and fantasy more clearly. Certain complexes nest in your subconscious and show up in your mind as hypersensitivity, wanting to be alone and do things by yourself, and so no one will know how you feel. You need a bit of humour and self-confidence. And I rather liked that interpretation because it gives a little spin at the end of it that, you know, if you can, I'm not saying that if you can laugh at things, because if the things are tragic, then there's no ability to be able to laugh, but to not take things quite so serious, because the 12th house is the house of dreams and fantasies and stuff, and Saturn's a planet of flipping reality, and wherever you've got whatever you've got in the 12th, you are going to conceal it in some way. Now, our last chart example today is a guy called Russell Grant, and he was a reasonably well-known astrologer because he was on television. There are no astrologers on the television anymore. There used to be breakfast shows that had them, and I was on television once in a program called Heaven and Earth on the BBC, but there's 0 astrologers now on television in the UK. Okay, I don't know what is in other countries, but UK, nah. They very, very rarely have astrologers on there. And I'll go through the chart first, and then I'll read his little blurb on Wikipedia, and there's also a little clip that I want to read you from the Guardian newspaper. So he's a sun sign Aquarius with sun and moon in Aquarius. The sun's 16 degrees, the sun's 16 degrees, big one, and the moon is 10 degrees, we're getting the flipping seconds there. So they're only 6 degrees apart, so he was born just before the new moon. He's got Libra ascendant, and his Saturn is in the 12th, also in Libra, and it's 1 degree, whilst his ascendant is 7 degrees. He's got Neptune retrograde in Libra in the first house. He's got Pluto retrograde in Leo in the 11th. He's got Uranus retrograde conjunct the MC in the 9th. Not that his MC's in the 9th and MC's in the 10th, but his Uranus retrogrades in the 9th, but they are conjunct. And he's got a little stellium of planets, so he's got Mars and Jupiter and Venus. So Venus and Mars are conjunct, but Venus is in the 5th and Mars and Jupiter are conjunct in the 6th, but all of those form a little stellium of 3 planets, and his north node's in the 6th as well. And his Mercury is in Capricorn. So even though he's a totally wacky, trust me, he's wacky, Aquarius, with Mercury being in a slightly slower sign and in the 4th house, it does make him his thinking is slightly more structured. So let me read you his story. So we're going to Wikipedia. So Grant was raised in a council house in the 1950s, his father working as a sales rep for a car accessory business. Later, his parents worked at Pinewood Studios. His mother, Jo, dealt with contracts and his father was a set designer. Grant spent most of his childhood in the care of his grandparents. After losing both his grandmothers, Lily Grant and Alice, to Alzheimer's disease, Grant suffered clinical depression and once weighed 27 stone. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about Saturn and his father. And he says, so this is him being interviewed for, what do we call it? Interviewed for an interview for the Guardian newspaper. So he's just been talking about the fact that he was in America and he found out that his grandmother, who looked after him when he was a child, had fallen ill. So he came back to the UK to look after. So he said it was Alice, his mother's mother, who looked after him while his parents worked at Pinewood Studios, his mother doing contracts and his father a set designer. Later, when his parents' marriage started disintegrating, he went to live with his father's mother, Granny Lily. She was terribly naughty, my Granny Lily. I'd bunk off school and she'd take me to bingo and whist drives. And then he says, it was their deaths, he said, that knocked him out of kilter. The two matriarchs going like that, my lovely Nan and then my Granny Lily. 4 foot 11 inches of pure dynamite. And that was the end for me, my dear. Clinical depression, the lot, darkness. Now, his natal Saturn, with it being in Libra, is all about fairness and relationships with other people. And it's also retrograde. So and Libra, as an ascendant sign, wants to be in a relationship, and he's been in a relationship for 30-something years. I think he lives with his manager. I don't think they're married. But his father wasn't there because he went to live with grandma. You know, his father was alive and his mother was alive, but they're working, and for some unknown reason, it doesn't explain exactly why, he went to live with the grandparents, or the grandparents took him on, and then he lived with the other grandparent. So his father wasn't there every day making his breakfast and stuff. So today we've been talking a little bit about Saturn in the 12th, as I say, only because I'm a sort of a living example of it. I didn't know that much about astrology when I got married. I definitely wasn't thinking about things when my son was born. It was only when he was small, because I said this before, I only got into astrology when he was very small, and my homeopath mentioned about Saturn. But he was born, my son this is, was born with Saturn in the 12th, and his father wasn't physically around every day because he was living in another location quite soon. So he was only about 2. He was pretty small, and it resulted in us, his father running off with another woman, resulted in us getting divorced. Now, I have absolutely no idea where it was I read about Saturn being in the 12th. And I used to use a computer program, which I've still got the text for it. The computer program doesn't work anymore. And that was how I learned astrology. And in that computer program, it said Saturn in the 12th house. The 12th house features your deep and inner self and is associated with secrets and hidden truths, brackets, and hidden lies. Having Saturn here can be a bit tricky because his relentlessly realistic outlook on life might be rather at odds with the ethos of the house. But actually, this can be a rather nice placement since it can help sort some of the wheat from the chaff, to be less polite, the mystical truths from the self-indulgent nonsense. So on the positive spin for Saturn in the 12th, you can't deceive too easily somebody with Saturn in the 12th. They're going to know the difference between right and wrong. Hopefully they're going to less likely have the wool pull over their eyes because it's a realistic planet in a house that does govern, as the author of that particular program says, the 12th house can govern things like lies and deceit, etc. So if you've got Saturn the 12th, do you want to tell us your story about it and how it's been for you and what aspects you got? Do ping me over an email, mary@maryenglish.co.uk. And I hope you have a fab week, and I'll be back next week. Bye-bye now.